to Lensflare.
Welcome, welcome.
So, this is our podcast where we talk about how to get into the biz, or how to improve your biz, or just how the sausage gets made.
What? No.
Okay. I mean, that's a phrase. That's a I didn't make that up. That's
Are you sure? Who says that? I've never.
a complex. I'm sure if we looked at like an Urban Dictionary.
Urban Dictionary has all sorts of weird things in there, so I don't.
How the lumpia gets made, people.
It sort of makes sense because I'm Filipino, but I still don't like it.
Okay. So we're going to talk about how things are done. And in this episode, we are talking about specifically what kind of camera you should buy as your first camera. So we're going to be talking about 3 kinds of people who would be buying a first camera. I'm generally going to assume that you've already worked with another photographer, often in front of camera, but maybe you've just been helping them. So you've been a model or you know something. So that, and where I'm going with that is that you kind of should know what you want to do. If you don't know what kind of photography you want to do, I highly recommend starting with your smartphone. With real, I'm sorry, smartphones are real cameras. They've filmed like movies and stuff with them.
They're just not as fancy or as bulky.
Yes, the bad thing about smartphones is how they're not bulky. It's not about fanciness or bulkiness.
For certain things, the iPhone is not good for. Like if I wanted to take a picture of the moon, it's really sad.
It is really sad.
It's super
for
sad.
Sure. So the aperture on a smartphone is, it's very wide. So everything's in focus. It's actually because it's such a small lens that effectively it puts everything in the focus, and that loss of bokeh, there's like apps that add bokeh, and there's tricks that they try to do with 2 lenses to get bokeh. It just, I mean, it's not the same. And if you wouldn't be listening to this episode if you super loved your smartphone cameras. But at any rate, if you don't know what kind of photography you want to do, I recommend playing with your smartphone. There is no reason to say that you can't do photography until you get your real camera. That is not the answer. It is the answer if you want to spend a lot of money and make a lot of mistakes. I highly recommend doing as much as you can with what you have, and you probably have a smartphone. That's my guess.
Okay, but so after the smartphone, what type of camera would you recommend buying?
And it totally depends on what type of photography you're trying to do.
Okay.
So the first kind of photography is for vloggers, OnlyFans people. These are people that I think generally want to film themselves. So these are self-portraits, self-video, things like that. And that was real unhappy sounding.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, people at home. So a self-portrait person needs a couple things. One, you need to be able to see yourself while you're in front of the camera.
I see you.
That's easiest with a flip out screen. So I'm generally going to recommend that if you plan on vlogging, and that's your primary focus, if you plan on having like a setup and putting your camera on a little stand and having a little Bluetooth remote and you just taking stuff, if you're looking to save money and or convenience, make sure that your camera has a flip out screen. That means probably no Sony, or it's very cheap Sonys, and that means no Canon. Canon has flip out screens. Nikon does not have flip out screens, I don't think. So Lumix, Sony, a lot of cheaper cameras, which is good because as your first camera, you should probably buy a cheap camera. So flip out screens, vitally important. Self-portrait. That's even, so there's an alternative. We use an external monitor for our camera. So we're using a Sony camera, and it's a Sony Alpha 1. So it doesn't have a flip out screen. So we have to have an external monitor to see ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. You could do that too. But I don't recommend it for your first camera if you're primarily going to be vlogging or primarily going to be self-portraits, because you don't want anything to be frustration. And managing power, managing batteries for an external screen, it can make the process just so, like, the more pieces you have to connect, the more frustrating it's going to be. And I don't want you to give up. I want you to be in it for the long haul.
You also don't want it to take forever.
Yeah. As far as like setting up goes, we have a tripod. We have multiple batteries for the camera so it doesn't die in the middle of a long recording. We have an external monitor. We have to run all kinds of power cords. We have to have an HDMI cable that's long enough but not too long. We have to have a shotgun mic and find that and put it in, because we often use flash photography. So we have to like swap these things out. There's like so many different pieces. And when you're first getting started, it's so nice to have a bag and a camera, and you're ready to rock. So that's why I say you probably want a flip out screen in that scenario. What was the other types of people?
Beauty photographers?
So beauty photographers, they are going to need a... these also could be vloggers, right?
Yeah, they could be.
They could be. They could be doing makeup videos. They could be taking photos of their friends, and they want to do boudoir, lingerie photos, things like that. All of them, I would say that you want to make sure that you have a replaceable lens camera. And that is what's going to allow you to have a nice lens. And a nice lens is going to allow you to get a smaller aperture number, which means more open, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but I mean, that's what it is. So you really want, I would say you want a minimum of 1.8. You could get a 1.4. I shoot a lot with 1.4, but you want at least a 1.8. Cheap lenses are going to be at like 4.5. And 4.5, you're going to see all the pores. You're going to see all the details. And that works for a weightlifter. That works for somebody who wants to look rugged and he wants to see every bit of beard stubble and stuff like that. But that's not what a beauty photographer usually wants. And I don't know, that's not really the name, but that's what I call makeup people. If you want to take photos that could be on the cover of Cosmopolitan.
So maybe like fashion photos?
Fashion photos. I just say beauty because fashion is a legit category, but I'm including boudoir with it. I'm including makeup. I'm including almost every camera can do video and photos. So it's not really like, you don't really have to make a choice between photos or video anymore. If you buy any kind of like new recent camera, if you buy an old camera, you have to, be more picky about that. And you have to choose, are you going to do video or photos? But you need a replaceable lens so you can get those good lenses. And you can buy a 2.8 lens to start with, but you're going to want a replaceable lens so that eventually you can invest in the thing that matters. And the thing that matters the most is the lens. The lens controls the look primarily, more than anything else. So if you're a beauty photographer, you need a replaceable lens. If you're a vlogger, self-portrait kind of person, not so much. But if you're a self-portrait, beauty photographer. So you want to take amazing portraits of yourself, then you need a replaceable lens and a flip out screen. And now you're starting to talk about more money. That you're just going to keep whatever each feature you add is going to just probably add to the cost. If you get a fixed lens camera, that means that you can't swap out the lens. And whatever you buy, that look, that's what you're stuck with. You're only going to have that look. And that could be fine.
What about food or landscape photographers?
Okay. So what I said about showing like beard stubble and weightlifters and stuff like that, that comes from a high aperture. So 4.5, 6, 7, something like that. For food photography, for landscape photography, you also generally want a lot of detail. I think for us, like I like the artistic look of food photos with lots of bokeh, that blur.
Mm-hmm.
I like the look. It reminds me of a oil painting of food.
Okay.
I think it reminds me of, I think like maybe Cook Magazine, because again, they would have photos of food, but it would kind of look more like an oil painting, right? A lot of people's first oil paintings are like a bowl of fruit, stuff like that. However, I don't think that people want food photos with lots of blur and lots of bokeh. In general, if you look on Instagram, I feel like most food photos are highly detailed. You can see like every little grain of pepper. And so for that, you want a high number, like again, 5, 6, 7. And for that, you can get a cheap lens or you can get a cheap fixed lens. That's fine. For food photos, you want to be able to probably take close photos. So you probably want a macro lens, and no fixed lens camera that I know of is going to have a macro lens built in. So that means you need a replaceable lens camera. But the lens that you buy for your replaceable lens camera can be cheap, because expensive lenses are generally to do one of two things: to either zoom really far, the focal length, or they're to open really wide, or both, I guess. So for food photos, because you're not taking food photos of somebody across like a mall court or something, like somebody's like taking a bite and you're like zoomed in on their face, that'd be kind of weird. And you're probably not doing that.
I don't know. There are weird people out there.
Yeah, there's weird people out there like that. Celebrity photos and stuff like that. But in general, you can buy a cheap lens. And if it's a macro lens, better. If it's not a macro lens, you can totally get by just really almost any lens will allow you to totally take good food photos. Period. Any lens, doesn't matter.
So what do you mean by a macro lens?
So normally a normal lens, and this is kind of important because when you're buying lenses, like it seems like unless you went to photography school, nobody explains what these things mean. A normal lens has a focusing distance of probably about 3 feet. That's what I think they generally are, maybe 18 inches, but I think about 25 to 36 inches, somewhere around there for most lenses. So that means that you can't get closer to the lens without getting blurry. It's like hold your hand up to your eyes and try to look in the grain of your fingerprints and things right up to your eyes. And you probably can't. It's probably super blurry. If you have really bad vision,
like me,
you can take your glasses off and you probably can focus on your on your fingers much closer than you can with your glasses on. So a macro lens
I still can't see.
allows you to focus on something really close. So a macro lens is going to allow you to take a photo of like a quarter or a butterfly, and it will be like close, like you can put your camera right up to it and take the photo.
Butterfly in the sky. I can go twice as high.
Man, I love that show.
Me too.
On the other hand, and that's what you need for food photos, right? It's pretty obvious that you might be in a restaurant and you might want to take photos of something super close. On the other hand, landscape photographers, they want lots of detail as well. And that's fine. That's a cheap lens. It's totally fine. You could take a cheap lens. But a lot of times with landscape photography, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. If you want that kind of photo where you like set up a tripod in the middle of a like a forest grove, and you want people to be able to see all the different things, the lichen on the trees and the mushrooms on the ground and the leaves and maybe a bird hanging out in the tree. You want all of that stuff to be visible. Then you might want a very low focal length. And if you want a low focal length camera with and set it to like 9, 10, 11, or 12 for your aperture, it's cheap. That's one of the cheapest lenses ever. You're talking about like a 24 millimeter, 35 millimeter lens with no special aperture. You're good. You're totally fine. Any lens that came with your camera will take that photo. You're good. Fine. On the other hand, if you're trying to do the kind of landscape where you're going to like get up onto some sort of crest and you're going to like zoom in on the lighthouse, then you need a zoom lens of some sort. You probably need a 200 or a 300. You want to take photos of somebody far away, something far away. And so in that case, you're going to be taking photos outside. You're probably going to have a fast shutter speed. That's fine. Every camera can do that. And you're going to have the aperture closed in, which is cheap. So you're good, but you might be buying an expensive lens because you want a long distance focal length. For that reason, you almost assuredly want a replaceable lens camera. In fact, I would say for almost anybody, you want a replaceable lens camera, except maybe vloggers. Vloggers, self-portrait people, you might be able to get away with just a flip out screen and a fixed lens camera. That is the cheapest kind of camera that I know of. And I will have some in the show notes for you to buy. If that's the kind of stuff you're doing. Everybody else, you need to be able to swap the lenses. And the good thing about that is that you can buy a relatively cheap camera that you can replace the lens. You can buy a crappy lens in the beginning. The next time that you feel motivated to spend money, then you're going to buy another lens. You're not going to buy a new camera, or you shouldn't buy a new camera. So that's something that people can often get distracted by, is that I have a nice camera, or I have a lot of nice cameras. And why? Well, because I'm a sucker for buying stuff, probably. But I bought each camera because I had a specific problem I wanted to solve. And if you want to go to the next level, then you probably will eventually want to buy a new camera. But any photo with a replaceable lens camera, you can probably take between the cheapest camera to the expensive camera. And people will say, man, I wish I had your camera because then I could take your photo. I can grab your camera and I can take that photo, the same photo with your camera. It's as long as you have the same roughly similar lens, I can take the same photo. So it's not about expensive cameras. It's about expensive lenses. They are generally. But even then, depending on the kind of photo you want, I can probably take it with a cheap lens. It's totally legit. Now, what a more expensive camera should do for you is one, better video. So you want to start getting into indie filmmaking, you want to be able to do 4K, 8K, you want to do, some crazy things like that. Yeah, you need more expensive cameras for sure. Because what more expensive cameras do is they allow you to take faster photos. And video is the fastest photo you're generally going to take because it's going to be 60 frames a second, or it's going to be 180 frames per second if it's like slow-mo. It might be 8K at 60 frames per second. Faster photos cost more. It's just, that's when you need a more expensive camera. So if you want to take one amazing shot, use your cheap camera. You'll be basically taking the same as my expensive camera. If you want to print the photos, you need an expensive camera, probably, depending on how big you want to print them. If you want better computer tools, like automatic tools. So autofocus, the more expensive camera has better autofocus almost always. Otherwise, the lens is the important part. The microphone that you plug into your camera is the important part. The things you plug into your camera does all the work. So that's where you should spend your money.
Hey, baby. Ooh, I want to know, what was your first camera?
I feel like this is like You Don't Know Jack, and like each like subject you're gonna like sing a song.
Listen, I'm gonna make this about me too.
My first camera after my smartphone was a Nikon. So I bought a Nikon. I don't know why I bought it. Well, because I borrowed a Sony. And the Sony I borrowed overheated all the time. And when you spend an hour setting up everything and getting the light and you're like, we're good to go, let's start recording. And then you get about 12 minutes in and then you realize that it overheated and you can't do anything for another 20, 30 minutes while it cools down. And then you try it and then it comes back and you record another 5 minutes. Man, it makes you hate that brand. So I hated Sony for a long time. But I bought a Nikon. I loved it. I still love Nikons. I bought another Nikon after that. I bought another Nikon after that. In the middle there, I bought a Lumix. I did buy a Sony camcorder. And since then, after that, I bought a Sony. I bought the Sony that I have right now. I bought a Red Dragon. And I would recommend any of the cameras I bought. They were all good cameras. Highly recommend them. I don't recommend the Sony camcorder. I don't recommend the Mevo cameras that we use a lot. I don't recommend them unless you absolutely know what you're getting and what you're going to be using it for.
That is a lot. My favorite, though, is that he says Nikon now.
Yeah. So the Japanese, they officially say that you can say Nikon, or you can say Nikon. And technically, the Japanese syllables should be pronounced
Nikon.
So that's 3 letters. Ni, ko, n. The n sound, that syllable is the only single letter consonant kind of sound that they have in their alphabet. The reason why you can pronounce it all three different ways is because
They're very polite.
and they didn't want to make people feel bad. So people started started pronouncing it more German style, and they just went with it. They said, okay, that's fine. But yeah, I pronounced it the Japanese way. Once I realized that not everything from Japan is a Japanese word. So if it's not a Japanese word, it sounds like whatever it's supposed to sound like, right? But in this case, it is a Japanese word, and it is kind of meant to be pronounced Japanese style.
So, did we figure out what kind of actual camera do photographers get?
Yeah. So if you're a vlogger, you, I did say that if you're doing self-portrait and you're doing, if you're a guy and you want to show chiseled features, then you want a flip out screen and you're fine with it. Any cheap camera, you probably want, you want a 35 millimeter lens, but if you're gonna hold it and do vlogging where you like walk around holding it pointed at yourself, you might want a zoom lens that allows you to go to like 2460, something like that. If you're buying your first camera and it's cheap, you're probably gonna buy a micro four thirds camera, and that's something important. You might hear full frame or micro four thirds. So those are like the two big sizes of sensors that you might get in a camera. And a lot of people separate the expensive professional cameras from the more amateur or prosumer cameras, whether or not they are full frame or they're a micro four thirds camera. And if they're a four thirds camera, then you probably want a really small number as a vlogger. You probably want like 12, like a 12-35. That means that the lens can go between a 12 focal length to a 35 focal length, something like that. We have one of those lenses here, and that's going to allow, not this one. This one is
35.
This one is a micro four thirds lens, and it's 35 to 100. So this, the big difference, and we're going to end this here soon, but the big difference with a micro four thirds is that you should generally double the number so that you can understand the full frame equivalent. So a full frame of 35 is the equivalent of the human eye, more or less. A full frame of 10 or 12 is more like the equivalent of like a goldfish. So you can imagine a fish having this like really wide view of the world, right? So they say like, oh, it's kind of like a fisheye effect or something, because it's just like
round.
It's round. The world is round to a goldfish. So in general, movies are shot at 35 because you want the movie to seem realistic. You want it to seem like the world you're actually seeing with your real eyes. But for most people, they like it if things are squished. So instead of stretching everything out like a goldfish, well, realistic is 35, but people, especially photographers, don't want the real world. So they want stuff squished. So you'll hear like nifty 50, because the 50 millimeters is enough bigger than a 35 to squish your face a little bit and make you just look a little bit slimmer around your face. And people love that. So people almost, like I shoot almost exclusively with a 50. That's what I love to shoot with all the time, is just a 50. Wedding photographers want to squish people's faces even more. So they might shoot at 80, 100, 110. That's something like that. So for a vlogger, because you're doing self-portrait and you're not trying to do fancy stuff generally, you want a 35 with a flip-out screen to yourself. But if you're going to hold it in your hands, that's going to be like zoomed in on your nose. It probably won't even be able to see you. So if it's going to be like that, you're going to be hand holding it close to you, vlogging. That's where you're going to want something smaller than 35. You're going to want something that's like 15 or so. But if you're buying a cheap camera, a micro four thirds camera, those are doubled. So when it says 35, if I convert this to full frame, that means 70. So I said 50 is slimming. Well, this is 70. This is already like, this is crazy. This is double the human eye. And so if I tried to like vlog with this camera, it would be like showing my nostril. It's not going to work. So with a micro four thirds camera, and presumably you're vlogging, you're going to want something more like 12, because 12 is actually 24, which is still wider than the human eye normally sees at 35. So yeah, that should kind of cover you. I will go into details if you guys write in for specific, like, hey, can you just dive deep? What does somebody need for lingerie, like boudoir kind of stuff? I can totally I can break it all down, like the lenses, the lighting, all the things. Or landscape. I can talk about the kind of like indie filters you might want to do, all the different things.
He can even talk about long exposure.
Yeah. So if you want to do astronomy kind of things. But this is just a general, like, what kind of camera should you buy? What kind of things should you be thinking about? I'm not going to, like, this episode should be just as good 2 years from now as it is now, because I didn't mention specific, like, you should buy a Canon EOS or something, whatever. Check the show notes. We will try to come back and update the show notes periodically, just so that it's always kind of pointed at decent cameras. Yeah. I don't know. It won't be the newest, because these are first-time cameras, but the best camera at the time for somebody to buy.
Within the same price range.
Yeah. And it's going to be broken down in the show notes, a couple different price points.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to hop on over to the bonus cast. And the bonus cast is mostly where we just hang out and talk to the people who back us on our Patreon. So if you are already our backer, then let's hop on over there. And if you're not, consider backing us on patreon.com/IgnisUmbra.
I said a hip hop. Hippity hop and you don't stop. I don't know. Rock it to the beat. Oh man.
Is that from Revenge of the Nerds?
I don't know if it's on the.
I think they do a concert and they're like hip hop. I don't know, whatever it is. All right, yes, guys.
I'm gonna need you to sing that for me.
All right, I need lyric sheet. All right,
we can do that. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.